Hello, my name is Mike Markey, and on behalf of the Theater Arts Guild, I want to welcome you to Theater Arts Guild's Legacy Project, a chance to talk with some of the folks who have been working in the Omaha theater community over the years and just find out exactly what they think of the Omaha theater and their impact on it. Today we'll be talking with Mark Manhart and Bonnie Gill of the Grande Olde Players. I'm talking with Dr. Mark Manhart and Bonnie Gill, who worked for years with the Grande Olde Players. And we'll be talking about the theater and what they did with the theater and what the theater did in the Omaha community. But the first thing I'd like to do is just find out more about you two and how you got into theater and how you worked together. So, Mark, if you wouldn't mind starting and just tell us your background in the theater, how you got started and how you got started in Omaha theater.
Well, it was around in the 70s, early 70s. The villains were popular, and so a part came up in a show to play a villain. So I played Stafford Blackman is a villain, and it just after that I was lost. Theater was my hobby.
But you're a dentist by trade.
I still am a dentist.
You are a dentist. So you just happened into the theater someday? How did that get started?
Well, if you want to go way back,
Yeah.
I was at Creighton Prep, and the college was putting on Stalag 17,
Okay.
and they needed prisoners in the background, so I stood in the background and looked mean. That was easy for me as a prisoner in that show. First thing on stage. And then years later, this hit me with
Playing the villain.
playing the villain.
Yeah.
And then I did other things, in like neighborhood or parish things, theater, and then ran into this woman over.
No, before then you were at talk about the Norton.
Oh,
You were
yeah.
there long before.
Yeah, I
got involved.
don't know how I got involved with the Norton, with Dwayne Ibsen
Right.
started, and we were down in the old market in that little hotel
Right.
down there, and I got involved with that backstage box office. Eventually, I was treasurer of the company, and we wanted to move, and so they asked, look around, and I found this place in Dundee. There was it was going to be vacated, this area, this shop, framing shop. And I talked with the guy that owned it and cut a deal with him to move our theater in there and build it into a theater, and Dwayne and the board liked the idea, so I did that. And got working there in the box office, the same thing, Eventually I did a part, in fact it was Sheba, what's that show?
Go Back, Little Sheba, or Come Back?
Come Back,
Come
Little
Back,
Sheba,
okay.
yeah. And I played a real minor role, and John Beasley
Sure.
was the lead in it. God, he was good. Oh, and working there, you really, you're talking about small theaters. Kind of working there, you just couldn't help but learn.
Mark was my dentist since
Okay.
I was 20 years old, okay? And we didn't know each other very well until in the early 80s. He asked me if I would come and usher at the Norton, because he was in charge of getting ushers.
Okay.
So that's where that started, that I got that chance to be around theater.
Right.
And then some years later, probably 83, he asked me he knew I played piano a little bit, and he asked me to put some background music behind a show he was doing for the Calyx group with Father Schwartley.
Yeah.
And so again, I was a nervous wreck, even just playing the background music, but he kept pushing me. And finally got on stage. I did one show with the Grande Olde Players under the direction of, I did several, but I did this one under Gary Isles, and it was The Hollow. And I had
Hollow? Was that it?
I think
Oh,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, and I had to be I wanted to work with this guy that I heard was really good, you know, and I had to be the mealy mouse wife. They said that'll take some acting. Because by that time we were married. And then I had to kill him, and then I had to do a suicide. So, I mean, I had no idea. I hadn't even read I didn't try out for the part. They didn't get anybody that he liked, and he goes, I'd like you to try this. And I went, really? You know, so I sort of backed into it. And so I was a nervous wreck, and I was on early in the show, and then I was on late. And for the first 2 weekends of our 4-weekend run, I threw up between that first act and the third act every night. But I ended up winning an award for it.
Some worked.
And
In the old days of beginning this, one of the people that we turned to was Rudyard Norton, the Norton Theater,
Right.
because he was old at the time, but then he really was experienced, and he really gave us some very good ideas about, like people would say, I'm jumping ahead here, but she suggested that we start this theater that I wanted to start. If we would make it for older people, highlight older people. And Rudyard said, oh, there's some more, people would say, well, what shows are there for older people that older people could do? And he said, oh boy, there are great shows like Agatha Christie, Neil Simon, those kind of Aykroyd. Those shows are just designed for older people. The problem, it isn't the problem, but the situation in those days was older people were played by younger people, pretending that they're old. And I want to tell you, we found out that how did you put it, if you really want a character, get an older person, because that is the
they have
character.
so much life experience.
Oh,
it's already in there. You just have to tap into it. And they're usually not too inhibited.
Okay, so how does a theater come together? Once you have the idea, who helps you put it together and...
Comes together by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
Come
the
on.
people that she mentioned, Rudyard, we had the advice, we had that. Now where do we go?
Right.
What do we plan? We set up, found a very good one-act play with a very small cast.
Well,
And-
it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 women.
And we,
This
Six
was the first
women.
production.
This was
First
the
production.
first production, Anybody for Tea. It's a short one-act play.
Okay.
Between those 6 women, they had 105 children. I always remember that.
and we found the Paxton Manor
And
downtown.
the youngest one was, I think, 60 at this
Yeah.
time, and the oldest one was 78.
Wow. And they're in the ballroom at the Paxton?
In the ballroom.
We were in the ballroom
They
at the
let us use
Paxton.
it, and we planned on doing it for
A weekend.
a weekend.
The first weekend. And the night before, we both got cold feet, and we were both saying, how much money do you have? Can we take a plane out of town after this is over? And it went off beautifully.
Yeah.
And we ended up doing 9
9
performances. And
With-
that was when we discovered that the character is already there.
Yeah.
With older
In the
people,
actor.
they can't make a mistake. If these old ladies that playing old ladies, they can't make a mistake. They can't make a mistake.
And the market
and-
was there. The market
Yeah.
was there. Older people were just craving to see themselves or their
families
or their
And
friends.
there are two women in here.
105 kids to come see it. There's an audience right there.
That's half the house right there.
Helen Traverdi and May Eden.
Okay.
Those were 2 women who actually had a theater background.
background.
They had some theater background, so that was great. But the other, and Mary Evans too,
Yeah.
had done
Yeah.
elocutions or something she
Elocution.
called them.
Yeah.
But the other 3, this was Nellie Goldman, who had worked at Pendleton
Okay.
behind a sewing machine.
Yeah.
So they had no theater background at all.
And where'd the name Grand Old Players come from?
Well, we were at over a cup of coffee at the airport somewhere like that. We were. What do you call a thing like that? Well, you got to identify it some way. And we came up with Players.
Okay.
Players something, grand,
Because
sounded
you
great.
had been with the Kingsmark Players
Yeah, I
or
had-
something, so that's, the reason the E's are on the Grand and the Old,
Right.
I had just come back from a trip to England, and I think that's how that
Yeah, and
happened.
it's
Crazy.
old spelling of old.
Gotcha.
And so we use that, but there's a disadvantage to that because people felt, well, these are just a bunch of old people.
Old people.
Well,
We
that's
fought
true.
that. We fought that our whole 24 years.
Yeah.
And towards the end, I kept saying, I always wanted to change this name about 5 years into this thing to the Grand Omaha Players.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because then we wouldn't have had to change the, and I always got outvoted.
And
So
the
let's talk
mission-
about that. What was the guiding principle of what you did? It wasn't to only hire actors above a certain
No.
age? What
It-
was the Grand Old Player?
it
We
was-
wanted to
Uh-huh.
highlight the
highlight the
character of
character.
the older adult.
Okay,
And we got a lot of pushback. Well, for instance, we do this first show,
Mm-hmm.
and Mark and I are the only two people who are physically able
Yeah.
to move furniture and stuff. I said, we have to get some of our kids here because this is too hard. Because we were the only, physical. And so we wanted to, and I wasn't. The rule was you had to be over 55 to be on stage.
Yeah, sure.
And
That
I
was-
wasn't. And when the older actors started to say, well, they can't be involved, they're not over 55, I said, well, I'm not. And they said, well, you're different. You started it. But we changed that very quickly because it became an old bias,
Okay.
And we started bringing in even kids and
Yeah.
younger people and doing more intergenerational shows and having a much healthier mix. And it was very quickly accepted by everyone because it was a better situation. But we
But always-
always made sure, right, that the character of the older adult was going to be highlighted, or we
Highlighted, yeah.
picked plays that had a nice, juicy part for an older person in it,
and what'd you discover after you did that? What was the byproduct of having a more intergenerational
Oh, it was
composition?
It was terrific. You get it. This was very, very evident when she directed Lost in the Yonkers. You have two boys.
Yeah.
Okay, that relationship between boys and grandmother in 1942.
Well, and it wasn't just boys, it was children
Yeah.
and grandparents in
Yeah.
1940s.
Right.
I had to teach
Teach
these
these
two kids about, or make them aware, not teach them, but I had to make them aware that you didn't stand really close to an adult
Yeah.
when you were a little kid, and you never spoke until you were spoken to.
Yeah.
You didn't just blurt in there. You might have as a little tiny child, but as a teenager.
cultural nuances.
Yeah, there was respect
And it really
there.
worked both ways. The older people were a little hesitant about working with kids. Well, this disappeared. That.
Oh, yeah.
And the other was the kids working with the older people, even the younger kids who dominated, not younger kids, younger adults who dominated theater. It was a little uncomfortable to have an old guy come in here and outshine them on stage.
Perfect example of
Yeah.
that was, we did Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. And we have the Brewster sisters. In fact, quick little sideline. Lois Whalen is I think she's 78. In the very first show we do, Anybody for Tea. 5 years later, and we cast her to die on page 5 because we didn't think she had the energy.
Okay.
She auditioned one day real high, and then she auditioned kind of flat the next day. And we didn't think she probably had the energy to do much more than that. She came back 5 years later and did Arsenic and Old Lace with Bama Thompson. And Bama Thompson was a lady who was up here at an elder hostel workshop
Yeah.
in Council Bluffs. She lived in Austin, Texas, and she moved. She got a part in the Grand Ole Players, and she moved. She closed down
moved
her
here.
apartment,
Yeah.
and she moved up here, because
To get
you
the
all
part.
let me have a whole lot more fun than they do in Texas.
Is that right?
That
That's
is
great.
right.
Huh.
Anyway, we had these young men
Yeah.
Roland Peters and Ken and Bill Fry. Bill Fry was a radio personality at that point here in town. Anyway, these two guys were a little intimidated because the two ladies would go off script. That was a wild show. That was a show you wanted to see every night because they would go from Act 1 to Act 3 to Act 2, and it was pretty wild. But they could never, ever be out of character because they were the Brewster sisters.
Yeah.
They, no matter what. So these guys said they never learned more about theater and never had more fun about being on their toes than they did in that show.
Let's jump back and talk a little bit more about how you evolved. So you started the Paxton with a one-act. When did you have your first home, and how did that happen?
We
2
traveled
years
from there to the Westminster Church, and we would
Oh, yes.
different places.
The first 2 years, it was
2
the
years.
Paxton, Westminster, and College of St. Mary.
Okay.
And then we
They would let us have a certain chunk of time.
found this place. It was the old
Venetian Club,
Phoenician Club on 39th and Leavenworth.
the
somewhere.
block north
Yeah.
of Leavenworth, yeah.
And you were talking about that lady that was doing the construction.
Oh, I
We-
showed you those pictures
Yeah.
where they were putting together the theater.
Right, yeah.
We
In their
redid the
60s.
inside.
This woman here is in her 60s,
Oh, there we go, yeah,
and she's the contractor.
right. This is at the Phoenician Club.
At the
Yeah,
Phoenician
for about
Club. 'Cause-
5 years.
Because it was a meeting place, so it didn't have
Or-
seats or a stage or anything. And it was, what, 76-seat theater, I think?
Yeah, about. And that was so successful. I think
We
the
were there
last-
for 6 years.
Okay.
5 or 6 years.
UNMC bought it to make a parking lot.
And we were really so successful there, we would do a show like Last of the Red Hot Lovers and fill that place for 12, 16 performances, And we had put aside enough money that we went to the bank and said, could we have a loan to build our own theater? Well, banks don't loan to theaters,
Right.
And we finally found this place on 90th Street, block north of Blondo, Grant Street, and that was just an
A vanilla,
empty box,
they called it a vanilla box.
box.
Yeah.
And that was our downfall. The place was great, but we were renting again.
Yeah, if we had been buying it,
We
it'd
should
been
have
better.
bought a building. We had the theater for 24 years. We weren't thinking ahead. And, our overhead there was about $3,000 a month between the rent and the utilities.
Okay.
And that was just tough.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
the-
any theater in town will
But
tell
the
you that's a
location-
tough.
And the theater, we eventually put that together to be Omaha's finest small theater. It was just beautiful theater.
Well,
And the parking we did it this way. Where do we go in the city? What's there? There was a police station right next door,
people like that.
and their parking was beautiful. Were there steps all over? No. And could we do it the way we wanted to? Because we had built that other theater, and I had helped build the Norton Theater. So we put all those good ideas, and then the older people were terrific to listen to because, for example, you know how you sit a row of seats?
Mhm.
You go down to the Orpheum, and there's this much room to put your legs.
Right.
I mean, that's an old theater. Well, they said, none of that. There's going to be 18 inches or something like that
Yeah, we had.
to be
nice-
able to get in and out of there, and those seats are going to be comfortable.
So this was just a big open space
Yes.
in a plaza up there at
Yeah.
90th and
We actually
Grant
had to
and-
put in the restrooms and everything.
So you put in restrooms, did you create a fixed theater space, a proscenium, or fixed seating?
Oh,
or
yeah.
what sort of
Yes.
performance space did you have?
It would be this half of this theater right here,
120 seats.
120 seats.
And we had a stage with storage underneath,
Okay.
A restroom in the back.
a restroom in the back for the
backstage.
actors. We finally had a backstage, because we
Yeah.
never really had a backstage, so that was real fun.
That
I mean, a nice thing to have. And, you know, a sound booth and.
Okay, fixed lighting for every show.
Yeah, we didn't have the greatest lighting, but we had, you know, you got everything here, but we had enough to really, you know how you think of the acting is everything in a theater? The real thing of theater is backstage. The lighting, the sound, the seats, the exits. What they say at the Firestone Theater, what's his name?
Firehouse?
Firehouse. He always said, the play starts at the curb,
Huh,
right
okay.
there.
Yeah.
We always tried to keep that in mind. And so it was with the older people's advice that kept us kind of in line. I could give you a lot of examples where here I am, the president of this outfit, and I can't even do what I want to do.
Oh,
You know?
yeah.
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask you about. So you started your own theater and you incorporated, you nonprofit.
Mike Sullivan helped us do
Nonprofit.
that right
Great.
away, yeah.
So how
we're
did you set
501c3.
yourselves up? You have to have a board and you have to do certain things.
Well-
How did you maintain your level of control over the theater?
Mm-hmm.
And how'd you work with the board and all that? Who was your board?
If you're on the board, you worked in that theater.
Okay, very good.
If you were on that
Yes,
board.
people
this is
used
not
to
a-
ask me later on when we were
You cleaned the
successful, they would
bathroom.
come up and they'd say, how do we get on the board? How do we get on the board? And my pat line was, you like to clean restrooms? Voila, you're on the board.
And, you know,
Because
So it was
everything,
very much a working board where they also,
Oh.
was there also an expectation that they would help support financially of the theater? Was that
No.
secondary?
that was secondary.
You wanted a working board, okay.
And I think one of the things that made it a fun experience and a struggling, always struggling, we didn't have any paid staff. Later in the course of the running of the theater, the directors got an honorarium, but
Okay.
we were all volunteers, and we were very much trying to make it to pay royalties and rent.
So how did a typical production get put together? Who produced it? Who directed it? Who chose it?
well, at first, we
The-
were
the
doing
board
all of
chose
the
the-
directing, and choosing a thing at first, but you get your board and you enlarge it to 6 people, maybe 8 people, and then you have a couple people read scripts and
Okay.
do we do this or that play? And that's a real critical thing. But you know, in a small theater, you have 6 or so people, and you can make decisions real quick. And you can do what you want to do, and if it's a little bit over here on the right or a little bit over there, you can make decisions very fast. Something happens that, you know, we have somebody that can't direct, or in the process of getting people to be on the board, we're also collecting directors. And some of these people you'll see in here became directors. And seeing an older person direct a show, kind of unusual in Omaha. Charles Jones did it for a long time. You know, he finally retired or ended his career at the Playhouse. Well, somebody said, I thought, boy, I wish we could get Charles to direct at our theater. And they said, well, ask him.
Because he wasn't doing anything
Yeah, he was
else
out of
at
theater.
that point.
Yeah.
We asked him, and here he came in his later years
And directed.
and
a couple
directed
of
a
Is that
couple
right?
shows.
Remember what he
Yeah.
directed?
Papa's Angels and
Papa's Angels.
Curious Savage.
Curious Savage,
Yeah.
And,
Papa's Angels is something he had written and worked on.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You talked about control and flexibility, and I wanted to ask you, because we also talked about who chose the plays. Did you have a season
Every time.
every time?
time.
6 shows a year.
6 shows a year.
And it
And-
started out with 16 performances and then later went down to 12.
Okay.
Mark and I always
Or-
thought it was a shame. We had done parish things or school things, and we always thought it's a shame to put all that work into something and do it for one weekend or do it for one performance. It's crazy.
And did you, in the flexibility of your season, did you ever hold shows over, or did it always
Yes.
end when it
Yeah.
ended?
Yeah.
You did,
Yeah.
okay, when
Several
it's
times.
popular, you had the flexibility and your cast was good with that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't know that that's done as much anymore, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's hard.
difficult to
it's very difficult, yeah.
get people to.
And you had 6
Yeah.
shows a year, but you also toured some. Now, were some of those shows designated to tour, or was that just
We toured mainly in the beginning.
Okay.
Because we didn't have a
When you didn't
home.
have a, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and where were some of the places you toured to?
Well, we went
To the
around-
amphitheater in Glenwood.
Yeah.
We went out to someplace in Grand Island.
Yeah, we went
I
out
don't
there and
remember
did
what
a
that
show.
was.
Doctor's House Call, you brought me this wonderful, I wanted to mention, you brought a lot of articles and.
We got a lot of publicity in the beginning. I
From New
think.
Horizons, explain
Yeah.
New Horizons.
That's the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging, free newspaper for people over 65.
And still publishing.
It's still
Oh,
publishing.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So if
In
you
fact,
want to know
when
what's
we-
going on in that world, this is the place to go.
Yeah.
Right, when we
Right.
talked to Chris Gillette, we had a choice to go under their wing or be on our own, and she started the Intergenerational Orchestra.
Right.
A few years after, maybe 1 year after we started the theater, and they are still going.
Oh,
Because
boy,
they
are
have some funding, but we chose to go on our own because we thought we'd have more creativity and flexibility.
Yeah,
And
and I think
and
that,
Manhart's difficult to work with.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
right.
that. So choose your friends carefully.
Well-
You did bring a lot of wonderful articles, and a number of them, you had articles from Steve Milberg, the Omaha World Herald,
Yes.
a number of years ago. And I wanted to ask you what sort of coverage you got in the local area, in the local media, for the work that you did, and,
well, we always, like any small theater,
yeah,
we got coverage, which is fine, but we didn't get enough.
sure.
We didn't
Who
get.
does? But I,
No,
you know,
I
it's
thought
the
we
same.
did. I thought we could get, it got more difficult as
Yeah.
we went on. One thing about our theater, Mark always said, oh, we have the finest little theater in Omaha. We have the finest little theater. I said, we may have the finest facility.
Yeah, that's
We don't
what I
have the
mean.
finest little theater. We had a very good theater, and we had some shows like Lost in Yonkers
okay.
that blew off the water. I mean, there was no touching that. That was a fabulous show. And then we had some real stinkers come along.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was the price you paid for letting almost anybody come on stage. If you could walk and breathe and you had a desire to act, you got a chance. If we could make a small role for you, you got on stage. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes
Sometimes it
it
didn't.
didn't work.
How do
But
you deal with that as a theater and as theater practitioners? Is the meaning behind the work supersede all that, and you say, well, we're giving this opportunity to people, that's what's important? Or,
he was the champion of that.
Okay.
I was like, we can't do this. We have to have the best. We're
Yeah.
losing money. We can't do this. But he was the champion of that, I have to say.
Well, I don't know what you mean by champion. But
You-
one of our
you were
champions was
Ernie Gore.
Ernie Gore. So we formed the Ernie Gore Award.
Yeah.
And we gave our own awards for the theater, like TAG gives award.
Okay.
You remember the days when the Norton Theater got almost all the awards? Oh, my gosh. Well, we started our own awards, and this was
And
one.
explain, Ernie was a UNO professor in the recreation area. And he was very influential in the beginning, and he actually died on a Saturday after rehearsals. And I thought, what a way to go.
yeah,
He didn't get to perform that show, but he was really, really good. And another
Another-
fellow that helped us was Frank
Frank
Bogart.
Bogart.
Do you remember Frank
In his-
Bogart? Frank Bogart was a pharmacist who
He
was
got-
shot right next to the shelter belt. His drugstore was
Right.
right
33rd
there where
in
California Tacos is.
I know the
think.
place, yeah, but I don't remember
He was a
the
board
incident.
member,
Huh.
and he,
Paraplegic.
yes, and he performed in Breath of Spring.
And everybody
And-
said, oh, you can't have that, you can't have that. Well, in the review, the reviewer said, boy, I love the way it scared him, the way we treated him on stage, because we treated
Pushing the
him.
wheelchair around and just,
And just like any other
like
person on stage, he said, I was scared, about this poor guy that's well, Frank did so well in that show, you couldn't take your eyes off him.
and he was very helpful.
Yeah,
And-
in the workings and advice in the theater.
And another example of that was, we had a clown, Ruth Nelson, and she was on stage from the beginning. She was fabulous, but she had MS, and it got worse and worse and worse, and it got to where she couldn't perform very well. It was hard for us to say no to her. And she said, I have to be on stage, I have to be on stage. So we wrote in a part where she came out sort of like a Lily Tomlin character, and we wheeled her on stage with a office chair that had wheels. She did her part, and then we wheeled her off.
So did people
So-
begin to seek you out, knowing that there were opportunities to be on
Probably.
stage that they may not find elsewhere?
Probably.
Bob
Probably.
Ellsworth comes in to audition. He's up auditioning and we can't hear him, and so we yell down, Bob, we can't hear you. Project.
Yeah.
And she said, you better go down and talk to him, just go down. So I go down and say, Bob, what do you do? What do you do? He says, that's what he said.
He said, I'm playing cards and
Cards.
waiting to die. Now, come on.
That's what he said.
And you said, do you sing?
Yeah. And so I said, Bob, would you sing your lines?
Yeah.
So we go back to the stage, and he sings.
In a
and-
whole different.
Oh, beautiful.
He went from this mealy mouse, quiet guy,
Yeah.
to this baritone, wonderful voice.
Yeah.
Old Man River.
And he ended up going to almost every theater in Omaha and having a part.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Look what
wonder-
you did for him.
What?
Yeah.
Look what you did for him.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's an example, and those
And
kind
he
of
was
things
a
came
real
up all
character.
the time.
Yeah. Something I wanted to mention is, towards the, you talked about, we were all volunteers.
Right.
But this fellow, he brought his wife. He was from the beginning, Roland Peters. He brought his wife to be on stage, and he would always sit in the back and critique. And Mark said, if you think you know so much about it, why don't you direct?
Yeah.
He ended up being one of our best directors.
That guy,
He
Ron,
was so observant,
Yeah.
and the people loved him. So we had somebody like Roland Peters, who had absolutely no theater background, none whatsoever, directing, alongside Mark Schnitzler, who was the drama director out at Scott,
Okay.
alongside Larry Fortney, who was the drama director at Westside. These guys, Roland was from the beginning. The other two guys came towards
Later.
the middle to the end, but they were all directing shows. Colleen Marino, she was a seamstress. When she came to us, she said, I want to be involved as long as I don't have to sew. She didn't want to have anything, and this was very typical.
Anything but.
Yeah.
Very typical. People wanted to be involved
Yeah.
as long as they didn't have to do something that they had been doing for years.
Okay.
This woman took our reservations for 18 of the 24 years. And we had to have this picture made with her name on it at the box office, because when anybody came, the first question was, are you Colleen?
Oh, okay.
She was such a sweetheart.
Yeah.
And
They
as Mark
loved
was
her.
saying, she took these reservations in her home, and then she had to go to an assisted living. She took them in the assisted living. And the
people
residents
there-
were so interested in all the people she had coming in and out to pick up the box
Reserva-
office reservations.
So the natural question is, if you, in your own words, anybody who wanted to be on your stage could be on your stage.
if we could find a
Part,
Yeah. So how difficult it become then to have to say no to people because you didn't have parts
Very
for it.
difficult.
Because you had people coming to you
Yeah.
because there was a need
Yeah.
that they felt.
Yeah.
And that must have been very difficult to say.
There's the guy right here. I can't even remember his name.
We're trying to
He
think of his name.
ushered for us, and he desperately wanted to be on stage.
Yeah.
And, we just couldn't because physically, and he, his mind was slow and very nice guy. Well, I wrote a play about the Navy.
USO Christmas.
USO Christmas. I've written several plays. Anyway, and I wanted him on stage, and so she figured out a part that he could be on in that play where we have music. And I figured he looks like a big
Like a
guy.
maintenance
Yeah.
Yeah.
Navy guy, doesn't
So
he?
Sure.
he played the engineer for the
The ship.
the ship, which was, it's about being on the Lexington
Okay.
aircraft carrier.
So he had a few lines,
He had a
and he
few.
had this
Yeah.
really unique walk, and we had music behind him walking across stage. Changed his personality.
Yeah.
Changed his personality. He
And-
was more outgoing after that.
you couldn't take your eyes off this guy.
Yeah.
You know, because it would be, is he faking that or what?
You couldn't
You know,
fake that.
And he couldn't. He was just
Huh.
that.
Must have been very fulfilling for you as theater people.
It was,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
That was the thing that kept us
And
going.
you had, obviously, you had just umpteen favorite people that you worked with over the
Yeah.
years. Favorite productions or most memorable productions, or good or bad?
For me, Lost in Yonkers,
Yeah.
for directing. For one that I was in, Man Who Came to Dinner. I got to play Maggie, which was kind of my personality, second in charge.
When was that?
Oh, 1995, 96,
Yeah, around there.
maybe two, no. Yeah, it had to be before 2000 because we weren't in this house, yeah.
What comes to mind for
Mine
you?
is very easy. Lord Capulet. I mean, that's
Way
it.
back there.
How could I have any other better part?
Yeah.
In directing, it was
To Kill a Mockingbird,
To Kill a
probably.
Mockingbird. Mockingbird. And I've written plays. And writing a play, there is nothing better than that, than to write a play and see it performed.
That's the best. Huh?
And see it performed in a way that is better than what you thought it would be as the author. And the Metropolitan Community College thing, I submitted a play, a one act, and it was about Pickwick. I wrote a play called Pickwick, Dickens,
Okay.
okay? And one of the characters is a horse, okay? And the horse doesn't say anything. They do this one act play, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, this is gonna really be a bomb. Those young college students played that so beautifully.
He said, I never knew it could look like that.
Never would I ever thought it would be so great,
Right,
especially the horse Neddy.
right.
And the horse didn't say a word, but all you did was watch that guy playing and listening to a horse. It was so beautiful. And that's what I love is you have a script and you have it written, this way.
Then the director takes
The
it,
director
and they can
takes
do
it
what they
and-
want with it,
And And a lot of that, and some of the greatest things in that play is the nonverbal things. Joe Maloney at the Playhouse. If you were on the stage with Joe Maloney, you didn't have a chance because he was so good at the it's like this. Joe would be going, and it didn't matter what was going on stage, you couldn't take your eyes off it.
Now, I want to come back for a
You go
minute. Because I think it's important that Mark and I may have started this,
Yeah.
but we could have never done 24 years without all the people involved. And there was another couple, Helen and Lou Ryan.
Yeah.
And Lou Ryan was kind of our MC at the end,
Okay.
for many years. And people would, ask about him like they asked about Colleen Marino.
Oh,
And the other fact is, all these different people that we brought on stage, there were the people like Humphreys, who probably was never going to go to another theater, but there were a lot of people like Erica Hall,
Okay.
big Playhouse
Sure.
person. She was on our stage. Eric Griffin,
Yeah.
good Bridget Say Bridget.
Right.
They would come new to town and didn't know much, and so they could get on stage quickly. We'd have somebody like that come audition, and we'd go, yay.
yeah, yeah.
And it
They
just
got a part.
elevated,
They got a part.
the whole,
Yeah.
We had a fellow up in Fort Calhoun that came and played. Al Dunning. And this was what was so much fun, is to watch it. Now, Erica and Eric, they were pros, but Al Dunning, never on stage. He did a part with us, he did several shows with us, but he went on to the Playhouse and won the cameo for Social Security. That was just terrific. Or when Charles Jones did Curious Savage, Virginia Suki was with us from the beginning. And she always wanted to be on stage, and she was okay, but she was never really that great, and she got better and better and better. And when she did Curious Savage, I turned around
Yeah.
and looked at him and I said, now there's an actress. I mean, I had just watched her over the 20 years. She kept working at it.
So you had a family of people.
Yeah.
And you clearly felt deeply for all of the folks who helped you over the 24 years. How'd you say goodbye to it?
Oh,
We don't want to talk about that.
it,
No, it was
it
hard.
was hard.
Yeah.
What happened is, we did it right at the right time because the economy was going down, and it was costing Mark and I quite a bit of money at that point. And the other real key part, besides the money, was we had about 10 really core volunteers at that point, and we were losing 6 of them, either to health,
Okay.
death, or moving. One guy was going to go to Italy for a sabbatical, so some of it was fun. But it was like, oh my God, how are we going to replace these real, true blue, there every moment volunteers? That's difficult to
Right.
find. And I said, I think the handwriting's on the wall here. We were in a situation where we either had to sign another 10-year lease or come up with
$60,000 to replace.
well, maybe 60.
To replace the
I
heating
thought it
and
was
air
more like
conditioning.
20 or 30, but
So
yeah.
things were forcing
It
your
was-
hand.
That's
it was-
business.
Yeah.
It was certainly forcing our hand.
Yeah.
And like I said, a month doesn't go by that we don't run into somebody that says, when are you going to start that theater again? And
You still keep in touch with a lot of the folks?
we
Well,
do. In fact,
less and
this was a tough year for us. We buried 3 of our 90-year-olds from January, February, and March, and we have 190-some left. But
So what do you think was the lasting impact of the Grand Old Players? And
Oh,
you guys
geez.
still are involved in theater in different ways?
Yes, and
And
some of
music?
our people are. Helen Ryan, she's performed at different theaters. Karen Cortez performs all over town. But I would say the fact that we gave people a chance.
Talk about the role, the state of intergenerational theater in Omaha today.
It's pretty good.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think we were a part of starting that. I
Yeah.
don't think there was much of that going on in the 80s, but
I
I'd say
don't
it's
remember
good.
how it started, but we started doing a class with homeschool
Oh, yes.
kids. And, they don't have any stage for their school, so we would do classes and do plays with them and gave them a chance to experience that. And they were kids, teenagers.
And
usually.
one of our homeschoolers, we ran into her at Christmas. She's working for Disney.
Is that right?
Isn't that fun?
But that, I
Andrea
think-
Darby.
Let's not forget those kids.
Yeah.
And the impact that you had working in the intergenerational aspect, the teaching that happened both ways.
Yes,
He was
yes.
very reluctant to do that home. It was Lois Whalen's granddaughter. She asked me
Yeah,
if you would do
yeah.
and I told him, I said, no, these kids are usually very disciplined. They're not the troublemakers. And
Well-
he ended up really
Not yet.
loving that.
Well, it must be very gratifying to know the impact that you had, not only on the kids, but on theater in Omaha. And we could probably spend another day and a half talking about it all.
Okay,
We'll rewind the cameras and get it going.
yeah.
But I do want to take the opportunity to thank you, not only for talking with me today, but for the work that you did in Omaha. And
Thank you,
continue to.
Michael.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
I want to thank you for joining us for this edition of the Theater Arts Guild's Legacy Project. And I want to thank my guests today, Dr. Mark Manhart and Bonnie Gill from the Grand Old Players. I also want to thank Ryan LaHood, our videographer, Rick Goebel from UNO for helping us set everything up, and Susan Tracy from the Theater Arts Guild from arranging the episode.